I want to get one thing out of the way before we start talking about croissants, which is that I'm going to refer to these as croissants for the rest of this video and not croissant, okay? Because I can't do that every time. So excited. Hey everyone, I'm Saffitz, and today I am showing you how to make croissants, like the highest achievement in all of pastrydom. I don't think I will ever get tired of eating these. So we're gonna make basic all butter croissants, ham and cheese, almond croissants, pain au chocolat. There's nothing better than a freshly baked croissant, but then like somehow it gets better when you add chocolate and ham and cheese. I really wanna encourage people to try this at home because it's fascinating and fun and challenging, and like you might get obsessed like I did and just make them like 15 times in a row. For this recipe, I became like a woman possessed about making croissants. I made them at least a dozen times at home, and there is so much to learn. Now I'm very like attuned to the flaws in the recipes that I make, but even at my worst batch, they were still so delicious. You can get very good results at home. Like I've never had a bigger thrill than when I pulled out 8 beautiful, golden, like puffy, gorgeous, layered croissants from my oven. Croissants are in a category of pastry called viennoiserie, and generally speaking, these are pastries that are something called laminated. So laminated is kind of a technical, jargony pastry term for a layered pastry. Butter is rolled into dough, rolled out and folded and rolled out further, and this creates a series of sheets of butter separated by layers of pastry, and that is what creates this layered, crispy effect in things like puff pastry and danishes, and of course, croissants. There's just so much to talk about in this recipe. If I were editing this video, this would be like a 4-hour video. So in order to adjust the recipe so that you are able to have freshly baked croissants before noon, we do this over 2 days. So this is like perfect for a weekend baking project where you'll do the majority of the work on a Saturday, and then Sunday morning you wake up, you form the croissants, let them rise, and bake them on day 2. The first step for making croissants is to make something called the détrempe, and that is the dough that we're using that's going to enclose the butter for our lamination. I'm going to say this at every single point in this recipe. This step is very important, and you need a strong dough to support all of those layers of butter and to not collapse when you bake it. In general, if you can find a flour between 11 and 13% protein, that's a good selection. Something in that range, that's what I recommend. Now I gotta talk about yeast. Again, so many things to talk about. I'm using active dry yeast because for people at home, that's by far the easiest kind to find. Almost every recipe that I've made with active dry yeast, I'll tell you to activate the yeast or proof it, which basically means dissolving it in a warm liquid. 99 times out of 100, your yeast is alive and it's fine. I'm pretty confident that you can just mix it right into the dough. I've never had a problem doing that at home. Okay. It's 12, 120 grams of whole milk. The first thing I want to do is hydrate everything and do an initial mix. So I'm going to start by just mixing this on low. So this is going to look dry and shaggy, but let the mixer go for a few minutes and it will come together. So here we have our initial mix of the dough. It looks kind of like a cauliflower. It's not smooth. It doesn't really have any elasticity to it. You can see it just breaks, but that's okay. We want to now let it rest. I want to give time to the proteins in the flour to hydrate. This is going to help us to develop the right amount of gluten that we want. My butter pieces here are cold, which is important, and I'm going to add these to the mixer. This is the part where it's more helpful to have the mixer with a dough hook. By hand, it's really the step of adding the butter that's a little bit more challenging to do, so I'm happy to let the mixer take care of it. A nice slow mix, though, is one of the keys to the right texture of dough. The dough has transformed. You can see what a different texture it is. It's completely absorbed the butter. It's much stretchier. It's a very smooth and supple dough, and that's what we want. It extends easily and seamlessly envelops the butter. And here's a great tip. So this is something that I picked up in culinary school. I'm going to cut a slash in one direction and then a slash in the other direction. Basically reoriented the gluten strand so that as it rises, this will expand, and then I'll have an easier time forming it into a rectangle, which is the shape that we need for the lamination. And I'm gonna let this sit at room temperature until it's about 50% expanded in size, so 1.5 times. And then we're gonna transfer to the fridge and let it chill and finish a nice, long, slow rise for a few hours. All right, butter. Now we're going to talk about butter. The flavor of croissants is butter. So that's where you want to go for the highest quality stuff you can find. The recipe calls for European or European style butter. That designation means that there's a higher percentage of butter fat. Butter should have some plasticity, which means the ability to bend without breaking or snapping. Kerrygold has that even when it's cold. And as we get into lamination, I'll explain why that's really important. I'm just going to sort of loosely fold up the parchment paper. And I have this kind of loose packet. And I'm going to use my rolling pin to lightly beat the butter. I don't want to in order to soften it without warming it up and make it pliable. I cannot imagine that my neighbors loved hearing this noise day in and day out, but then I would at least bring them croissants the next day. So just, this part's a little noisy. And now I want to focus on getting very clean straight sides, and I'm making a very level block of butter. Somewhere around an 8-inch square, a little bit bigger is fine. I would say there's like a surprising number of recipes where I call for a ruler, and I'm not trying to bug you or the reason I'm calling for it in the recipe is because I think if you use it, it will make your life easier down the road. Like a present. You can see that I've folded the parchment into a square. The butter is smaller than the parchment, and I'm going to beat it again to fill in all of those spaces. And at a certain point, you'll be able just to roll without beating it. So I'm going to just move to a rolling motion and force the butter into any places within the square where there's an air gap. You can see that. Let this firm up in the fridge while the Détrempe finishes its rise. I have a swap. It has finished its rise in the fridge and is now cold and is basically about doubled in size. So I'll show you what this looks like. You can see how the dough has expanded, and those 4 points have become almost like corners now, so that's going to make it easier to form into a rectangular shape. And there's just a quick kind of intermediate step that I want to do before we move on to lamination, and that is actually getting this into the freezer. The stakes get higher when we incorporate the butter. We have to control fermentation of the dough. And that just means that it becomes very important to control temperature and to keep the dough very, very cold so that the yeast stay very sluggish and calm and they don't produce gases. That is going to make it a lot harder to roll out. If anyone has a great at-home replacement for plastic wrap for this purpose, let me know. I'm going to actually use a technique similar to the one I used for the butter. At this point, I'm not concerned about thickness or dimensions. I just want it to be even. I don't want to freeze it solid. That's not going to help me when I want to roll it out. I just want to get it super, super cold and firm. So about 20 minutes should be about right. All right. So the next stage is locking in the butter. So it is enveloping the butter in the dough, and then I'm going to roll it out and do the folds for the lamination. The important thing here is that my dough and my butter are a similar texture, and that is going to help the butter to roll out evenly inside the dough. And for them to be the same texture, I need the dough to be colder than the butter. So that's why we had it in the freezer. In general, I want to go through all of the steps of lamination without adding a whole lot of excess flour. So I'm going to roll out my dough or Détrempe into a slab that is basically the same width as the butter block, but twice as long. You try to maintain at all times your square sides. I keep kind of running my hands under it just to make sure that it's not really sticking. You can also give it a flip. We're looking for butter that can bend but not snap. I'm going to place it in the center of my dough and close the butter in the dough by folding the longer sides down into the center of the butter. You can do any tugging that you need to in order to even out the thickness of the dough. You do not need them to overlap. You just need them to meet. So you can see I have an even thickness of dough all the way around, and now I'm going to pinch along the sides just to prevent the butter from peeking out. I've now locked the butter in, and I'm going to roll it out and do my first turn. I rotated the dough 90 degrees so that seam running down the middle of the butter block is now vertical. I'm going to beat the dough to begin to lengthen the slab and also thin out the butter. I found that beating it and like paying extra attention to the sides will help keep straight parallel sides. So periodically lift it up, make sure nothing's sticking. Now I'm going to go in with my rolling pin and start to roll, and I'm going to make a very long, narrow slab, about 2 feet long. The length isn't as important as the thickness. I'm going to go for about between a half and quarter inch thick. I'm not pressing down. If you press down, you risk squeezing out the butter and fusing the dough together. You know, then you won't have that definition of layers. So really, it's like a kind of pushing motion outward and toward yourself. So this is actually called a double turn. We're going to fold the dough in a way that quadruples the number of layers. Right now I have dough, butter, dough. But when we fold it, we multiply the layers of butter in between the dough, and that is what gives us the flakiness. Fold one end of the dough up toward the midline. And take the other side of the dough and fold that down. And now I'm going to fold the entire thing in half crosswise. And this is now called the book. So you can see I have now a slab of dough that's 4 thicknesses. 1, 2, 3, 4. I've now quadrupled the number of layers in my slab. This is called the first turn, and each time we roll it out and fold, those layers get thinner and they multiply. At this stage, the butter is now warming and the dough is also getting warmer. And we've also worked the dough, so it's going to want to spring back when I go to roll it out, so we want to chill it before we do yet another turn. And maybe a little bit of a rolling out, because the thinner it is, the faster it will chill down. I reserve the plastic from before. You can see that it has firmed up quite a bit. So I'm going to roll it out, and we're going to do the next turn, the second and final, which is called a simple turn. So it's a slightly different orientation than the first. Beating with the rolling pin. It just kind of kickstarts that lengthening process. So you might find that you have little air bubbles. That's normal. That is partly because of the fermentation. It's partly just because you maybe had some air pockets between the dough and the butter. You can just go ahead and pop them. I like dust it with flour, and then I wipe the excess off. I'm talking a lot, but you also want to try to go faster than I'm going. This time we're doing what's called a simple turn, where I'm folding it in thirds like a letter. So this is just a slightly simpler method, just like that. You can see that my ends have rounded a little bit, which is a very, very common problem. I'm just tugging on the ends of the slab to try to square them off. So this is your second turn, a simple turn, and your final turn. Take advantage of the tension against the plastic wrap and use your rolling pin to force it into like a square shape again and to create sharper corners. The dough slab has been chilling, so it's rested. And now the last step on day 1 of the croissant process is to roll out the dough into a slab, kind of like a pre-shaping step. It's to get it ready for rolling and forming croissants tomorrow. You're gonna wanna spring back. Try rolling in the other direction, so roll perpendicular to the direction you were going, and it should extend that way. The dough is starting to resist me a little bit. This is a good time to wrap it up again, get it back in the fridge, and then tomorrow, when it's nice and rested, we can roll it out if needed to the right dimensions, and we're gonna cut, roll, proof, and bake our croissants. I told you it was a process. I know it's a lot, but it's worth it. We've made the dough. We let it rise. We enclosed the butter. We rolled it out. We did the first turn, the second turn, and then we left it overnight. We're getting into the really exciting part where we're nearing the end of the process. So we want to create an ideal proofing environment for the croissants. This is a really important part of the process because this is what's going to determine how light and airy and flaky your croissants are. So we are going to use our oven to create an enclosed area for proofing. I have a skillet of water right here. I want to get this to an active simmer, and I'm going to place it in the oven, which is our proofing area. Then while we form the croissants, the water will cool off a little bit, and all that steam will make this ideal humid environment. I just get really nervous about this part. Nervous, excited. Let me go grab the dough. So I'm going to give this dough a bare dusting of flour. I mean, the bare minimum. If you see any air bubbles, go ahead and just pop them. Be careful when you're moving the dough so that you're not puncturing any of the layers. I am ready to start cutting. So the first thing I want to do is straighten the shorter sides. Because I want even size croissants, I am measuring and then making little marks with my cutter. And now I'm just going to use my ruler and connect those marks on the 2 longer sides and slice this into 4 even rectangles. So these are going to get sliced into 8 triangles, and each triangle is going to be 1 crescent. What's the word for a right triangle? A right triangle? Is that what that's called? Okay, so now I have right triangles. I want to make these into isosceles triangles. So anyone that thinks that trigonometry doesn't help you later in life, just think about making croissants. You're going to kind of eyeball it. You end up slicing like a tiny, tiny little triangle off the base. You don't really have to do this, but I think it helps to form more even crescents. And also, it does expose some of the layers at the base, which I like the way that looks in the final crescent. I like to give it a gentle tug along the short side, also a little tug to lengthen, almost like a witch's hat, like a little bit of a wider base, a long tapered point. So you don't want large gaps by any means, but you also don't want to be stressing the dough and creating a lot of tension. So I let it rest on the point of the triangle, and I sometimes give it like a little bop like that, because I want that point to stick, and it's going to rest on the point. Stick that right on the baking sheet. I'll put that guy right there. And then get 4 to a sheet. These are going to get really big. So I want to go loose on the plastic because these are going to get extremely puffy as they rise, and I don't want them to encounter resistance against the plastic. I did test freezing these, but you could certainly do everything up to this step, put the baking sheets in the freezer. You can even put them all in one sheet, freeze them solid, take them out, put them in your proofing setup just like we did, and let them rise. When I tested it that way, they took 7 hours to proof. Totally possible, and the ones that I froze were like one of the best batches I made. We're looking at around the 2 to 2.5 hour mark. So I'll check on these, see how they're doing, and then we'll talk about how do you know when your croissants are proofed. I'm smiling because I'm very excited. So these have been proofing for, what is it, like, it's been a while, right? 3 hours, 2.5 hours? Okay, so 2.5 hours, so on the long end of the range, these are proofed. To me, they remind me of Michelin men. They look like they've been inflated a little bit. The tools that you have to determine if they're proofed enough, they're basically all visual because we do not want to touch these. They are super delicate. While the oven is preheating, I'm going to uncover these and actually stick the trays in the fridge. One, it's going to slow down the proofing so they don't overproof while the oven preheats. And second, they are going to firm up in the fridge. It's going to make it easier to apply an egg wash. Carefully uncover them because you don't want to disturb any of the layers. And as I uncover them, I can show you, see how there's a little bit of a wobble on these guys when I gently shake the pan? That's an indication that there is lots of gas in these and they are proofed. We want a beautiful, shiny, burnished exterior. The best way to get that is to brush it with a mixture of egg yolk and heavy cream. Basically a half eggshell is a tablespoon. This gives you both browning and shine. The oven is preheated. Now we're gonna apply the egg wash. You don't wanna poke the croissants at all. They are so puffy and light that they're also on the verge of collapse. I don't want to coat the exposed layers in egg because the egg could fuse them together and prevent this kind of separation from happening. So I'm only going to coat the smooth top surfaces of the croissant with the egg wash. I think of in Charlotte's Web, where like toward the end, where Wilbur is getting brought to the county fair and the farmer's wife bathes him in buttermilk. This is just what this makes me think of. I think as a child, like that image really stuck with me. Someone tell me to stop fussing with them. Thank you, thank you. Sometimes I need to hear that. Okay, we're gonna go into the oven. Thank you. Okay, be gentle, and now don't touch them. Anyone else just wanna like sit in front of this the whole time and watch them? Oh my God, it smells so good. If they could pump this smell into like every open house of every house on the market ever, a huge spike in house sales. Is that a thing? It's like bake chocolate chip cookies when people try to buy your house or whatever. Oh, that's my timer. I'm gonna rotate each pan 180 degrees so that what's in the front of the oven is gonna go toward the back. I'm also going to switch racks. So what's on the top is gonna go on the bottom, bottom to the top. This is just all in service of having all the croissants brown evenly. Croissant troubleshooting. A lot of times you don't know when something has gone wrong in the process until you bake. So one thing that happens commonly is the butter leaks out of the croissants and pools on the baking sheet during baking. It could be that your croissants got too warm during proofing and the butter just kind of melts out. The other thing is your dough could just not be super well rested. So that's another reason why I like leaving the slab overnight. Generally one that's flat but like wide, like a big footprint but flat means that you overproofed them. They just don't grow a whole lot. Then you certainly underproofed them. You're not having this sort of webbed, even interior. That's a sign that your butter probably got too soft while you were laminating. There's a lot of stuff here. It's like it's just so technical and sensitive throughout the process, but they're gonna taste great no matter what. So I prefer a well done or bien cuit croissant, which I think these are. None of this like pale, this is too high for me to kick this up. Sorry. All right, here they are. I'll let them cool on the baking sheets, and then we're definitely gonna cut into these and see. This one looks great. You can see the spiral. There aren't huge air gaps, which I'm happy about. And I do have somewhat of a honeycomb. So I'm really happy with this. I think this is a great result for people at home. There are a few baked goods that I can think of that hit as many textural notes as a croissant. And it is this miraculous combination of extremely rich and very light, plus this very toasty, shattering exterior. Like, to me, it's hard to think of a higher achievement of pastry than a croissant. So once you know the whole method and process for making the croissant dough, it opens you up to being able to make lots of different variations on the classic crescent. So I'm going to show you how to do a ham and cheese version and a pain au chocolat or a chocolate croissant version. And we're using the exact same dough. The slab is rolled into slightly different dimensions, and I'm going to show you how to cut and form them, and then they proof the same way the croissants proof. So these are called bâtons or bâtonnets. These are designed especially for pain au chocolat. So I special ordered these. These are really not something you can typically find in any kind of grocery store or even a specialty food store. If you don't want to order them, you can go ahead and use bar chocolate that we can cut into similar sized bars. These bars broke when I was carrying them here, but that's okay. And I'm just going to slice crosswise, and I think it actually is easier if you sort of score it. All right, so the scoring and breaking method, to me, you get less breakage that way because obviously chocolate is brittle and it's going to want to break up into different pieces. These are slightly smaller, so we're going to cut 10 rather than 8. This is the dimensions that I want. So I'm going to mark 3-inch widths. Okay, that was weirdly hard, but I got it. I'll lengthen it a little bit. Place it about between 1/2 and 1 inch in from one of the short ends. Then we are going to wrap the dough around the stick of chocolate. And then right where you have this seam, you're gonna nestle in another stick of chocolate and keep rolling. Make sure that chocolate is fully inside the dough. And then look at how cute that is. I'm just gonna set up another slab, exact same way, and show you how to roll in the ham and cheese. You could really use any kind of thinly sliced ham from any grocery store in like the deli aisle, already packaged. That's totally fine. This is an Emmental. You could use Swiss cheese, you could use Gruyere, perfect. I wanna make sure that I'm using something around a ½ ounce. Wow, I'm kind of nailing it with these quantities. And then leave a little bit of a border along the short end so you can kind of get the spiral going, and then just fold. They're a little bit like chubbier than the pain au chocolat. There you go. So there's all sorts of things you can do with stale croissants to revive them and bring them back. And one of my favorite things to do is make almond croissants. It's like incredible. They come together pretty fast. I'm gonna toast it. So usually a frangipane doesn't call for this step, but I think it adds a lot of flavor. You're not having to make it light and fluffy like you would if you were making a cake. That's just not necessary. We want it well blended. It gets that really intense almondy flavor from extract that really almost, I don't know how to describe it. I'm gonna make my rum simple syrup. Simple syrup is just equal parts water and sugar. Take it off the heat. I'm gonna add 2 tablespoons of dark rum. And then I have 8 really old, I baked these a couple days ago, croissants. They're kind of sad. These, this batch I overproofed so you can see they're really flat. I'm cutting them in half like I was gonna make a sandwich. The first thing we're going to do is soak the cut sides of all the halves with the syrup. When products like this stale, they're losing a lot of the moisture, so we are replacing some of that moisture that has been lost. And I'm gonna take half of this mixture and divide it evenly among the 8 bottom halves of the croissants. Spread the frangipane across the entire surface all the way to the edges. The lids go back on top. So like that? Yeah. The second half of the frangipane goes across the tops. You can see this is why I didn't assemble on the baking sheets, because I have crazy crumbs and everything, and those crumbs would burn. Oh God, okay. Whew. Love these. Feel like a baking fairy godmother here to say that like you can do this at home. I've never made so many croissants in a 24-hour period as I have here. Feeling very good about all this. Okay, so here is my ham and cheese. I don't know, I don't really use this word, but these are kind of transcendent, truly. I don't know, it's hard to even describe. Like, so good. This looks like it could come from a bakery. Silky is like, to me, the word that comes to mind, just so good. It looks like kind of a meager amount of chocolate, but the chocolate is a very, very strong flavor, so I don't think that it actually ends up being too little chocolate. Maybe this one's my favorite now, I don't know. If there's anything that comes close to a freshly baked croissant, it's a twice baked croissant. It's amazing to take something which is already so delicious, the plain all butter croissant, and then to be able to transform it into pastries of this variety, where like one is more delicious than the next, is incredible. It's something you can do and try to perfect for the rest of your life. And along the way, you're gonna eat like a million delicious croissants, and that sounds like an awesome project. I just think I don't know, I keep like looking down and getting a little lost in my thoughts, because this is still overwhelming. This swirl is hypnotizing. I'm enthralled. Hopefully, if you try these at home, you're also enthralled by the process, which is, to me, nothing short of a miracle. Baking is a miracle. Oh my God, I need to sit down and drink this coffee.